Geekom is back with another mini monster. This episode of Some Gadget Guy is brought to you by viewers like you. All the folks who share content on social media and the incredible generosity of my patrons at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. More info on those awesome geeks later in the video. Alright, the folks at Geekom sent this my way to take on a test drive and share some thoughts. This is the XT13 Pro. Well, actually, this is just the box for the XT13 Pro. The actual computer is quite a bit smaller. Top of the line mini PC with a 13th gen Intel Core i9, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and a 2 terabyte SSD. Following in the footsteps of the Geekom A8 that I just recently reviewed, this is an Intel flavor of one of my favorite styles of mini PCs. Before we really get into reviewing the PC, I don't spend a lot of time focusing on the unboxing or the packaging. In my Geekom A8 video, there was like a little cardboard shelf that crumpled and it allowed the PC to slide around in the box more than I really liked. But Geekom is going all out on the XT. It's much nicer, fancier. You've got kind of like a top loading section for the PC and a little drawer that slides out for all the accessories. It's a very nice presentation. I just felt it was worth mentioning. I was expecting this to be nearly identical to the A8, but there are some surprising differences in the construction of these two compute boxes. First, there's just a lot more airflow, a lot more holes around the case. As Homer would say, you gotta have those speed holes. I don't think anyone would find that too surprising, as AMD chips typically deliver a better performance per watt than Intel. So keeping system specs similar, this one might need a bit more airflow. However, the internal construction is different too. Now, the AMD version has that extra plate that makes access to the guts a bit more difficult. You have to be really careful with the Wi-Fi cable that's taped to the inside. The XT13 Pro has the more traditional 4-screw design, but the case splits a little different than the older Nook clones that I've reviewed in the past. But once open, we've got immediate access to all the goodies here. The RAM, the storage, you can even swap out the MediaTek Wi-Fi card if we want. Briefly speaking on the quality of the internals, we do get an Acer SSD again, but while the AMD machine had crucial DDR5, the Intel machine is using Wuposit DDR4 RAM. But the really funny thing about this build, Geekom's shell for the XT is interesting. Looking around the sides, there is no SD card slot. But if we go to Geekom's website, it says it has an SD card slot, but that's obviously a lock port. So when I was opening this case, there is an SD card slot, but it's blocked by the case. It's right here. I just think that's kind of strange. Now, I don't think the XT12 had an accessible SD card slot either, but I don't know why you would block it if it's on the motherboard. It really points to how different the construction is between their Intel and AMD line. The A8 does have an SD card slot, which gives it one connectivity advantage over the Intel version. But this continues to be one of my all-time favorite form factors. With included accessories and a VESA plate, you can easily pop this on the back of a monitor or a TV. Now, I just recently reviewed another mini PC brand using a 12th generation Core i9, and performance scores aren't too different here. The 13900H is a beast of a mobile CPU, and this generation still had similar Intel Iris graphics. This was the last year before Intel switched over to the much better Arc integrated GPUs. Oh, computers. When we think about laptops using the Core i9, I feel a mini PC can sometimes feel a bit lopsided, because often in a laptop, the i9 would be paired with a discrete GPU. I mean, do a quick search right now. It's actually kind of hard to find a laptop with a Core i9 that does not have an NVIDIA GPU. In this chassis, we get excellent CPU performance, and it's a bit weak on gaming. Starting off with some synthetic scores, looking at Geekbench, we should not be surprised that numbers here look pretty close to the 12th gen Core i9. Single core scores barely keeping pace with the new Snapdragon X Elite chips out now in laptops, and multi-core scores falling behind that Qualcomm chip. Ditto our GPU synthetic benchmarks. The Iris graphics here can't keep up with X Elite, and obviously fall far behind AMD 7000 and 8000 series premium chips. Looking at some other tests, things like file compression, what surprised me was WinRAR. I got a better spike of performance here than I had on the 12th gen. That bold score is bigger than I've seen on previous top Intel chips, even just edging out the Ryzen 9. But the sustained performance was a tad lower than the sustained rate that I saw from that Ryzen. Now, WinRAR has no ARM native build yet, so both AMD and Intel are wiping the floor with Qualcomm in a test like this. All these years I've stuck with WinRAR because their results compare really well between Windows and Android. But for laptops and PCs, I need to switch this test over to 7-Zip, which does have an ARM native app, and wouldn't you know it, in a more oranges to oranges comparison of native software, the Intel falls behind the newer Qualcomm chip. But CPU performance, our browser benches are great. In both the older 2.1 run and the newer 3.0 test, the Core i9 here is put to great use, and this makes for a beautifully responsive web environment. It's one of the main selling points here, in my opinion. This could be a brilliant work-from-home machine if you VPN into a corporate server, if you use a lot of web apps, because it also comes with a respectable amount of RAM to facilitate that with a ton of multitasking, and it could be easily upgraded if you needed more. Into a creative test, in my 1-minute 4K project render, the CPU scores here are kinda bad. Switching to QuickSync, the scores improve significantly, but it's not particularly exciting seeing a render time longer than it would take to play the video out in real time in a little cheesy test like this. Not when AMD and Qualcomm can significantly outpace this result. The only thing I think might be impacting performance here, the fans on the XT13 did not spin up much while it was rendering. And knowing how toasty an i9 can run, I worry the PC was prioritizing a quieter fan curve. The Geekom A8 seemed louder in my memory, but those AMD render scores were significantly faster. So I don't have a conclusive answer here, but that's just my current guess. I can't find any way to adjust the fan curve on this little box. And dabbling with a little AI, the XT13 is able to play with quite a few of the fun little plugins and things like the Windows Photo app. The Geekom A8 with the 8945HS has a decent little NPU on it, and my new Qualcomm laptop are both noticeably quicker at using tools like generative erase, and they've gotten all of the recent updates for the generative content tools. But for just a little light scrubbing in the background, the XT13 is still usable. The Core i9, it doesn't seem to support those newer Windows generative content features. I genuinely don't think it's ever going to get all of those options. But we're still talking about the funny little editing plugins, not mainline necessary tools. Microsoft really hasn't shown us the benefits of having that additional NPU performance yet. AI still has a long way to go. Where this might impact users are on things like DaVinci Resolve's NPU plugins. That performance, you might feel that in another generation of DaVinci Resolve. I'm not inclined to weight that too hard today, but it could become an issue a couple years down the line. I think Microsoft is expending a lot of effort on tools people will try a couple times for the novelty and then forget that they exist. In this moment today, as I'm shooting this video, we still lack good real-world tests to compare NPU performance. I am not interested in more scored synthetic benchmarks. I want something I can point to as a tool that people will like, that they'll really use, and something I can measure in terms of speed or output. I'm not bullish on AI today. Moving on. Of course, we're gonna do a little gaming. A little gaming. This is not a bad system to game on. I think we need to respect that computers can be built for different tasks. This machine is not a gaming PC, but it can play some games. I always like starting off with Tetris Effect, and the Iris graphics doing a really good job here. 1080p at high quality. And while my screen recording is a bit choppy, the actual frame rate rarely falls from 60 frames per second. Now, to make sure nothing stutters, I'd still turn down some of the quality settings, but I don't think I'd need to hit the resolution. You don't need to do much to smooth out the last few occasional stutters. Now, into some older but still beefier titles, Hellblade, unplayable at 1080p and high quality. Even just walking around the intro, our lows can fall into the single digits. AMD FSR can be switched on and that helps, but walking around, we're still seeing dips into the mid-high 20s, and that's not gonna be fun when you get into some combat. Ditto Control, 1080p at medium quality, and the game looks like it's keeping an okay average frame rate, but the dips and spikes make this a mess to play. Turning everything off at 1080p, keeps the play more stable, but it's unimpressive to look at. So for those heavier games, I think folks will find a bit better balance, reducing resolution to 720p, where you'll find performance a bit more comparable and enjoyable to gaming on something like a Steam Deck. It's not difficult today buying an all-purpose general mini PC that can match or exceed the gaming performance we'd have of a dedicated device like the Steam Deck. And as a quick aside for all the folks ragging on the Qualcomm X Elite gaming situation, how quickly we forget that Intel's top option, what this used to deliver. The bummer for this, just like the 12th gen Intel chips, we lack complete support for Unreal Engine 5 and all the little DirectX bits needed to run a game like RoboCop, which crashes on launch. I don't believe this hardware will ever support that. That's a little rough, knowing a chip that hits so hard in so many other areas is already obsolete in this specific support. It's not a gaming PC, but it can play games, just not UE5 games. So here's where I really need to get an eGPU. The performance on 12th gen Intel to 13th gen isn't terribly different, but this new XT supports USB 4. I'm honestly not sure what to grab. I kind of don't want a big bulky rig that requires a dedicated PC power supply, but the few portable eGPUs I've come across seem to be only modest improvements over Arc and Radeon integrated graphics. So if any of you out there have some suggestions on things I might try, please drop some comments down below. Happily for performance, the Wi-Fi setup here is a little different than that Geekom A8. I showed you that cable taped to the inside of the chassis, and I tend to get better Wi-Fi reception than on the AMD flavor. Bluetooth and Ethernet speeds seem to be about the same. It's a little monster, but like the 12th gen Core i9 I reviewed, I think we have to get specific about who would need the most powerful Intel CPU that Geekom sells. In this same form factor, the Core i7 version of the XT13 Pro is $250 cheaper, and it only steps us down to a 1TB SSD instead of the 2TB. A Core i7 is still a huge amount of performance for a lot less. Comparing against the Geekom A8, the AMD is going to be roughly $50 cheaper. It'll have poorer Wi-Fi connectivity, but it's going to be noticeably better for gaming, and will have a bit more oomph in machine learning plugins that tap the NPU. And we can also compare against the Mac Mini. With an M2 Pro, this Geekom will compete very well in CPU-bound tasks. It's definitely going to fall behind in GPU performance, but the Mac Mini with half the RAM and 1/4 the storage is going to cost about $300 more if we're looking at MSRPs. Plus, we can upgrade the Geekom while the Mac Mini is pretty much done when you buy it. That pie's been baked. So if we want to catch up to the Mac Mini, we could put $300 towards an eGPU. Leave some suggestions down in the comments on this video. This is delicious overkill for most home and office computing needs. It really is crazy how prices have fallen on these last generations of AMD and Intel hardware, and how manufacturers like Geekom are able to jump on these mobile parts faster and faster after their release. Folks who need a small bucket of big CPU performance, and if you want to be able to multitask really well, I mean, you could run this as a beefy home server. I mean, this is still probably overkill for a lot of those home server kinds of needs. It's crazy to think that this could be a family PC that everyone can use and have it run something like Plex Media Server all the time in the background. You can hide it away really easily, and it can just crunch that data all day, every day. Especially where Intel seems to have better media transcoding support in Plex still. That could be pretty sweet, though I would probably side with AMD if gaming were going to be a bigger requirement. It's just good to have the competition. Now, I expect we're going to see more Core Ultra 7 and Ultra 9 parts making their way into mini PCs soon. I think the Qualcomm launch kind of rocked a lot of the major players in this industry. So what was going to be the AI PC fad, now a lot of these companies are trying to pack more powerful NPUs into their next generation hardware. Look at how quickly all of the other manufacturers have kind of abandoned Intel and AMD's current gen, and a lot of those really powerful PCs launched just months ago are already going on crazy sales. So it would seem Intel and AMD are motivated to sell out these older mobile parts. And that means we're going to find some great deals on crazy powerful systems. Mini PC hardware has been so much fun to cover recently, and Geekom has consistently turned out some great examples of this form factor. And as I dig into some fun little PC comparisons and work in my new laptop, the folks who get to see my coverage first are my amazing patrons. I always appreciate folks who share videos on social media, subscribe to channels, smash bell icons, and if you have the means, maybe check out the community on Patreon. Patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. My videos and reviews would not be possible without their support, and they get 4K videos, production diaries, behind the scenes, and the private Discord. Once again, Patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. A huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me keep the lights on here in the Gadget Lab. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet at SomeGadgetGuy, basically everywhere, but these days I'm trying to spend a bit more time on the Mastodons, a little less so on the Facebooks and the Instagrams, and definitely not on the Twitters, and I will catch you all on the next review.